Thanks for joining us.
Talkline Network Radio, America's longest-running Jewish broadcast network, the voice of the Jewish community.
Welcome to the podcast.
You are now tuned in to this episode of our podcast. Today, we are going to interview some of the greatest and most influential minds in our field. And now, please welcome your host.
You're listening to Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast on the air since 1981.
And we're back. You know that we're fighting against Hamas. The West is, Israel is, and one way, of course, is doing what they're doing, going to find Hamas in the tunnels and going after the leadership as well as their infrastructure in Gaza. But another way to go after Hamas is to follow the money trail. The billions of dollars that Hamas has been able to tap into, and our guest has suing an actual billionaire, Palestinian billionaire, who's funneled massive amounts of money to Hamas. Our guest is Gary Osen. He's a managing partner of Osen LLC. He's litigated complex cases, international dimensions throughout his career, including high-profile cases. When he got a judgment against the Bank of Jordan for supporting 24 Hamas operations, and currently a lawsuit is brought against Bashar Masri, accused of knowingly working with Hamas for many years, enabling international U.S. taxpayer-funded programs intended for economic development, diverted to support Hamas's terror infrastructure. Gary, welcome to the program. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So I know it's always great to follow the money, because without money, you cannot really have terrorist operations be so sophisticated like what we saw on October 7th. You're suing on behalf of October 7th. Bashar Masri, tell us about that.
So first of all, we're representing a little over 200 plaintiffs who are family members or themselves victims of the October 7th attacks. These are U.S. citizens or the family members of U.S. citizens who were killed on that day or in the subsequent conflict. And we sued Bashar Masri, as you said, who's an American citizen, as well as a series of companies which he owns and controls in the Palestinian territories. And the core of the claim is that under the guise of economic development and building five-star hotels and a Gaza industrial zone to promote trade and export. In fact, Masri and his companies collaborated with Hamas, helped them build tunnel infrastructure under the hotels and into the hotels, and also tunnels infrastructure at the Gaza industrial estate, which borders Israel right by the kibbutz Nahal Oz. So that entire infrastructure, we allege, was developed in conjunction with Hamas and with the cooperation and coordination of Masri and his companies.
And I know that part of that complex of businesses that he has in Gaza, where he has the tunnels underneath, which is supporting Hamas, he has legitimate businesses like Coca-Cola and other companies. So it looks kosher on the outside, but you look a little bit beneath the surface and you find the terrorist infrastructure being supported.
Yes, the Gaza industrial estate was actually funded and created by USAID back in 1997-98. And the idea was to promote economic growth and trade between Israel and the Palestinian territories. And part of that sort of enterprise was to encourage businesses, including the Coca-Cola bottling facility, to set up shop there. And they have for many years. So at the ground level, at the surface level, the Gaza industrial estate did what it was supposed to do, which was to develop an economic infrastructure to support local businesses and so forth. The problem was that the Gaza industrial estate was also used as a Hamas terror hub, and we allege that they developed a number of attack tunnels, including one, by the way, that the Israeli military discovered in 2018 that ran under the border. So the Gaza industrial estate is right next to the border. It abuts what used to be called the Carney Crossing, between Israel and Gaza. And Hamas built a tunnel from the Gaza industrial estate that went under the crossing near the kibbutz, but was discovered before it could be used for a terror attack.
So it was destroyed by Israel, and then he helped rebuild it, or
Yes,
under his auspices, it was rebuilt.
correct. Actually, in May of 2022, Masri personally attended a ceremony at the Gaza industrial estate with the deputy economic minister of Hamas, a guy by the name of Zarai, who is in fact very closely connected to Hamas's Qassam brigades, its terror apparatus. And they signed a joint agreement to redevelop and improve the Gaza industrial estate, which had been damaged by a prior Israeli airstrike. So essentially, they doubled down on their connection and their involvement with Hamas prior to October 7th.
Now, Bashar Masri, where did he make his money from? Where did he make his money in the United States? Did he make it from Gaza, Palestinian areas, or a combination of both? How did he get to be a billionaire?
It's a combination of ventures, mostly in the Middle East. He's had long-standing, very close contact and business relationships with the Qataris. They are the primary investors in his biggest project in the Palestinian territories, which is Rawabi, a planned community right outside of Ramallah that was for many years touted as sort of a new approach towards development and coexistence. Masri has sort of cast himself for many years as sort of the leading edge of Palestinian entrepreneurship and economic development, a moderate force for working with Israel, being able to develop the Palestinian economy and so forth. The problem is, in order to maintain his reputation on the Palestinian side of the ledger, he also repeatedly and over many years invested in Gaza, even when it was controlled by Hamas after 2007.
Did that go well with the Palestinian Authority, or they didn't care?
Well, I think he knows how to butter both sides of the bread.
He greased the wheels with money in all areas.
Well, I'll just say that he's very adept, not only at working with the Palestinian Authority and Hamas, but also with international aid agencies and the UN and others. He's very sophisticated and, by all accounts, very charming, and has done well for himself in this arena.
Now he's a naturalized American citizen. Bashar Masri also has done business with major corporations such as Apple, and I can't believe he sits on the board of Harvard Kennedy's School of Government. Maybe I shouldn't be surprised anything coming out of Harvard.
Well, he did sit on their board until a day or two after the lawsuit was filed, and Harvard asked him to step down, at least temporarily. So that's one board he's not on currently.
How many other Palestinian billionaires or significant businessmen are supporting Hamas that are on the radar screen to perhaps go after them as well?
Well, it's always complicated because so much of what happens in the Palestinian territories involves compromises with Hamas. If you set aside the sort of religious ideological component, Hamas also operates as a mafia, and if you want to build anything or get anything done in the Palestinian territories, it's a good idea generally to stay on their good side and to pass money and support their way, and so that's sort of an indirect way of saying to you that it's very hard to be a significant player in the Palestinian economy without being in some way connected to Hamas.
But that makes them complicit, does it not?
It does, and the question is, degree of complicity, big and small. Part of the problem with the sort of post-Oslo framework is that it encouraged a lot of people to be complicit. And really from a Palestinian standpoint, but also from the various aid agencies and the European Union and so forth. I mean, I don't think it's lost on any of those donors that pouring money into Gaza would benefit Hamas. But to the extent that they convinced themselves that it was helping moderate the Palestinian Society of Gaza, it was taking pressure off Hamas, and refocusing things, they justified and rationalized these kinds of investments, but with an understanding that it was actually benefiting Hamas, at least to some degree.
But does not the fact that you're suing this Palestinian businessman, billionaire, also send warning signal to other companies and other individuals that, hey, maybe we should be as involved because we can also be sued and come under that scrutiny?
100%. That's one of the major goals of the lawsuit and lawsuits like it. I think you mentioned this at the top here, which is that the IDF is pretty good at targeting Hamas leaders. It's the IDF soldiers are great at going house to house under terrible, difficult circumstances in Gaza. The sort of kinetic response to Hamas, that's something that Israel unfortunately has had to learn to be really good at. What they've been less effective at, and frankly the US government has also been very ineffective at, is targeting the folks who sort of are on the margins, are in the economic and political sphere. And it's not because the US or Israel isn't aware that money from the UN, for example, to UNRWA was going to nefarious purposes. It's that there's only so much political capital you want to burn and fights you want to pick on things in the international arena. So, and the Anti-Terrorism Act was passed by Congress in 1996. Since it was passed, the Department of Justice has prosecuted exactly one corporation for violating the statute. So you can see there's not a great appetite
to go after them.
To go after them. So that's where folks like us come in, because if there's going to be a deterrent to the business community, to the investor community in doing business with Hamas, it's not going to come primarily from either the US government, the Israeli government, and certainly not the European Union. So we're kind of a wild card in the equation, and one that hopefully serves as a deterrent to not necessarily those who are most committed ideologically to supporting Hamas, but those who think it's good business, think it's something they could get away with.
Our guest is Gary M. Osen. He's a managing partner of Osen LLC, litigated complex cases, including suing a Palestinian-American billionaire, Bashar Masri, in court to try to stop the flow of money to Hamas. He's also served as lead counsel several other major counterterrorism cases, including against HSBC and against the Cairo Amman Bank. By the way, Gary, can UNRWA be sued? Because they also are a major sponsor of terrorism. They've used international monies, including from the United States, to fund and help Hamas. It's been documented. Can they be sued?
Well, that's a great question, and one that's being decided right now in the courts, specifically in the Southern District of New York. As many of your listeners and viewers may know, the Department of Justice just very recently reversed its position on that issue and filed a letter brief with the court in New York saying that UNRWA could be sued. So it's now in the hands of the district court, and whatever the decision reached by the district court, it will almost certainly be appealed to the Second Circuit, which is the Court of Appeals, and likely wind up in the Supreme Court. So the answer to your question is we won't know for sure for probably another 3 or 4 years.
No, it takes a long time, but I think that's a great avenue to approach. Now, Gary, walk me through it. How does it work? You're suing, for example, this Palestinian billionaire, but in order to sue him, you have to have people who would say, let's sue him. In other words, how did he get to be on your radar screen as opposed to anybody else? And how did you get the people to be part of that lawsuit?
So first of all, the lawsuit against Mr. Masri and his companies is, from our standpoint, only the first of many that we plan to bring. We have investigators and a team looking at a variety of different, from our perspective, wrongdoers who have aided and abetted Hamas over the last couple of years. So this is the beginning, not the end of the process as far as the defendants go.
But how did you choose him as opposed to anybody else? How did you get the defendants? How did it work? The plaintiffs, I should say.
We've been working on terrorism cases, including specifically Hamas, for 20 years. So we have a pretty good sense of how the money flows to Hamas, both through international banks and through cryptocurrency and so forth, who the players are. The challenge is to collect evidence to be able to establish jurisdiction over a defendant in the United States, and to make sure that when we bring a case of this kind, that we think we have sufficient basis to actually win, not just sort of do it symbolically. So we have a lot of different investigations ongoing. In the case of Mr. Masri, your audience can just do a Google search to start on Blue Beach Hotel or Al Mashtal Hotel, Gaza, and you will see that there are videos available on YouTube and elsewhere of the IDF reaching those locations in December of 2023, January 2024, and detailing the Hamas tunnel networks that ran under and through and into the hotels. So that's, for example, an excellent starting point for understanding just the use of the hotels themselves. Then when you look at who owns the hotels, then go back through the history of the hotels and their prior involvement in past conflicts with Israel. For example, the Al Mashtal Hotel was damaged in 2014. There was a conflict in the summer of 2014. Some of you may remember 3 young Israeli teenage boys were kidnapped and murdered by Hamas, including an American citizen. And there was a subsequent very short war with Hamas in Gaza. The hotel was damaged at that time because even back then, the hotel grounds and tunnel infrastructure was being used to launch rockets at Israel, and the IDF hit the rocket launching sites nearby and caused collateral damage to the hotel. So when you look at the history of these things and you start to do a deep dive into who owned the properties, when they were developed, how they were refurbished, and so on and so forth, it's like pulling a thread on a sweater. You don't know exactly where it's going to end up or lead, but in this particular case, it led directly to Mr. Masri.
And I would assume that Mr. Masri, being an American citizen, makes it easier to sue in federal court.
It certainly helps with U.S. contacts for him and to a degree with some of his companies. It's also part of what we allege is that he used his U.S. contacts and his familiarity with the sort of ecosystem of the international institutions to get funding for a green energy project at the Gaza industrial estate. Basically got the World Bank's IFC to fund a project which involved putting a large solar panel installation on top of the buildings on the Gaza industrial estate to provide energy, electricity for the Gaza industrial estate, and as we allege, actually was used then to provide electricity to the tunnels beneath the Gaza industrial estate. Now, the beauty of this system from Masri and his corporate standpoint is that they got the World Bank IFC to fund the solar panels and the project, and then they got the World Bank MEGA to provide them with insurance for the same project. So when you electrify Hamas tunnels and the IDF then strikes those tunnels, the damage is covered by the World Bank as well.
Oh, so they're covering it. So, interesting. So the World Bank will replenish whatever was destroyed. For example, the solar panels. Are they doing that at this moment, or just waiting for things to calm down?
We don't know whether the check is cleared, but certainly they obtained the insurance through MIGA, it's called, for the very project that wound up being destroyed by the IDF after October 7th.
I like the fact that you're suing to stop the money trail. Can the World Bank be sued? I know it's much more difficult, but shouldn't they not be allowed to provide the infrastructure, the solar power, other power for Hamas to really continue? Because if they provide the funding for it again, Hamas, as long as they're around, are going to take advantage of it again.
Yeah, I think it's a lot harder, not just because of the sovereign immunity issues, but also because the statute requires us to prove that the defendants we sue knowingly provide the assistance. And I think it's much harder to establish that for donors like the World Bank or other institutions that may have provided general.
Forgive me for asking, but now if Israel has proven, when it's going to take over Gaza, that these solar panels were used to provide electricity for the tunnels. So that's a fact now. So if they continue to provide funding for it, they can't say we don't know that it's funding terrorism.
Right. Going forward, it I think would be a bigger problem than it was from a liability standpoint when they first approved the projects in 2018 or 19. But look, there's going to be a sliding scale of complicity. And because the burden on us is so high to begin with, we really look to target those
that you can collect from and do something about.
That we really feel a court is going to sense that they have a culpable state of mind, that they really want to assist Hamas.
Gary Osen is our guest, managing partner, Osen LLC. They've litigated many complex cases on behalf of victims of terrorism, and we've been looking at Bashar Masri, a Palestinian American accused of working with Hamas for many years, enabling and using U.S. taxpayer-funded programs for Hamas. What are some of the other high-profile cases you've worked on regarding helping victims of terrorism?
So our first our first case in this field was brought in July of 2004 against Arab Bank of Jordan. And in that case, we ultimately got a jury verdict for 24 Hamas attacks. A jury found them legally responsible for them.
Were you able to collect on the money? Because sometimes you can get a verdict and the government, for whatever reason, drags their feet in allowing the monies to be released.
There was a confidential settlement at the end of the case. I'm happy to say that the victims did receive substantial compensation.
Why is it confidential?
That's typical in most of these cases when they actually do settle, as opposed to going to judgment. Part of the terms of the resolution is that the terms of the settlement remain confidential for a variety of reasons, but for the benefit, obviously, of the defendant.
Right, because if they know that how much money was out there, it would encourage more people to sue too, if they understood the numbers.
Right. So in the case of Arab Bank, in addition to maintaining accounts for numerous Hamas leaders, for example, including the founder of Hamas, Sheikh Yassin, the late leader of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh, who was killed last year in a hotel room in Tehran, and many others. They also facilitated the transfers from the Saudi Committee for the Support of the Intifada to pay the families of, among others, suicide bombers who blew themselves up during the Second Intifada. So we started here with the concept of following the money. One of the things that I think we all heard back 20 years ago was Hamas is getting money paying suicide bombers. Saddam Hussein is paying suicide bombers. We asked the question, how does that actually work? Where does the money go? How does it go from Iraq or Saudi Arabia and wind up in the hands of the mother of a bomber in Tulkarm or Jenin. And it turns out that the process is pretty complicated. It involves a lot of logistics. Hamas has these so-called social welfare organizations and zakat committees that do intake, like social workers, to ascertain and make sure that the right person is getting paid the money. This is actually a pretty elaborate process. Terrorism at the scope and level that Hamas engages in is a substantial undertaking with a lot of logistics. And what we saw, and this is going to amaze, at least it amazed me, was to learn from documents that were seized by the IDF in Gaza, for example, that the Qassam brigades, the terror apparatus of Hamas, actually has its own HR department.
Wow.
The idea that this is sort of, we hear the cliche, the banality of evil, but there is a systemic approach to this. It's not just a bunch of folks, digging a hole somewhere, getting some rifles or RPGs and spontaneously attacking. This is a complex organization, relatively sophisticated, maybe not sophisticated at the level of the IDF or the US military, but it has vast infrastructure. It has social workers, it has HR departments, and one of the things that they do in putting together the payment structure to keep this whole operation going, to keep morale high, to remember every time the IDF strikes and kills Hamas operatives, that could be quite demoralizing. But if you promote the target as a hero and publish posters and organize events in their honor, and you make sure the family is taken care of, this sustains the energy and the morale of the Palestinian supporters of Hamas, and it's expensive. It requires a lot of money and a lot of logistics, and that is both their strength and their vulnerability, because the money is not generated locally. It is brought in sometimes by the Iranians, a lot of it by the Qataris, but also by the network of Muslim Brotherhood organizations around the world. And for that, they need to use the international financial system. And that is the potential choke point for cutting off the money, forcing them to do it just by, couriers with suitcases. And that's the goal, is to really discourage financial institutions and corporations from playing in the sandbox with Hamas.
Terrorism is a major business, which I think you've documented. And by the way, people think Hamas is primitive. They're not. Hezbollah very sophisticated. They've even infiltrated Israeli intelligence in years past. They even had manuals of soldiers and troop movements on the Lebanon borders. So these groups are very sophisticated. And then in the case of Hezbollah, I think with Iranian intelligence, I'm not sure Hamas where they get their intelligence from. Wouldn't be surprised if there was more of an Iranian connection. In that context, is Iran also liable as part of some of your lawsuits?
Yes, Iran played a major role in providing training and intelligence for October 7th. As you noted, Hezbollah, which is, or at least was, an even more sophisticated actor than Hamas, operates a vast network around the world of businesses and logistics facilities. They are, in fact, probably the most significant trafficker of cocaine from South America to Europe. And they work very closely with the various Colombian and Mexican drug cartels. So they're incredibly sophisticated. They have huge budgets, and they depend on access to the U.S. financial system because most of the money that they're moving is in U.S. dollars. And that's why Lebanese banks have been so important to Hezbollah's operations over the last 3 decades.
Has Israel's attacks on Hezbollah put a cramp into their operations in South America with the cocaine trade? That's a major source of revenue. Has that been affected by their losses in Lebanon?
No, not from what we've seen. Hezbollah's operations in Lebanon have been radically degraded, and its leadership has been largely decapitated. So I don't want to in any way diminish the unbelievable achievements of the IDF over the last year in reducing the immediate threat on the ground in Lebanon from Hezbollah. But their international operations are really unaffected. And this goes to what we said earlier, the kinetic side of things, bombing the Houthis, dropping a bomb on Nasrallah. These are the kinds of things that the US and Israeli governments and their military excel at. What they're far less effective with is the soft power aspects of this, which involve operations in multiple countries, law enforcement coordination, the willingness to go after the middlemen, the bankers, and the money exchange businesses. I mean, we sit here today with two of the largest supporters of Hamas being Qatar and Turkey. One is a NATO ally of the United States, and the other is a major non-NATO ally of the United States. It's this kind of diplomatic dissonance that allows for the flow of money to continue to these terrorist groups.
And there we have much less recourse what to do about it.
Yes, I mean, ultimately the decisions are political, and until and unless the U.S. Congress, the U.S. administration really decides to do something meaningful, put chips to the middle of the table to encourage both of those countries, for example, to change their behavior. We're in a world in which Qatar is the largest financial donor and supporter of Hamas. It hosts the Hamas leadership in Doha, and yet the U.S. and Israel, to a lesser degree, have entrusted it with being the mediator to facilitate hostage negotiations.
So money will be flowing as long as Qatar and Turkey are going to be enablers. But the question, you mentioned about Lebanese banks. Are you going after some of those banks? Because while you can't stop Turkey and Qatar, but certainly Lebanese banks may be vulnerable to lawsuits and shutting them down possibly.
Yes, we have sued Lebanese banks on behalf of American service members who were targeted by Hezbollah in Iraq between 2004 and 2011. Very few people realize how many of America's casualties in Iraq were directly attributable to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps of Iran and its proxy Hezbollah, which were on the ground in Iraq during that period, working with local Shia militias to kill American troops. So we sued 13 Lebanese banks in 2019, and actually after we sued one of them, the U.S. Treasury Department designated them as a specially designated global terrorist. So that case is ongoing, and again, our goal is to put not only pressure on those banks that have long dealt with Hezbollah, but also to expose the networks, provide information where it's wanted by the U.S. Treasury Department, and to encourage, and if I may say so, sometimes embarrass the U.S. government into activity.
They should be embarrassed in that sense. But I just want to make that point. It's not just Jewish victims of terror that you've been going after. In the case of dealing with Iran and the Islamic Revolutionary Guards, it's just veterans of the wars that were not necessarily Jewish that you also have been advocating on their behalf.
Yes,
suing on their behalf.
The majority of the American victims of Iranian terror are American citizens. And they, of course, include service members who were targeted, but also journalists and aid workers, sometimes kidnapped and murdered, tortured. The public does not realize. I think even the folks who, we all tend to now look back at the Iraq War and say, it was kind of a disaster in the way it turned out. and it was an unnecessary expenditure of blood and treasure. But I think a lot of people just think that what happened there was just kind of bad luck. Local people in Iraq really weren't happy with the U.S. occupation, or former regime elements, and they kind of filled the vacuum with violence. The reality is that most of the violence directed against the coalition forces in Iraq was funded and fueled by Iran. And by the way, that when we talked a moment ago about Hezbollah being there, Hezbollah and the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard Corps, worked with the Shia militias directly, hand in glove. But even Al-Qaeda in Iraq, which is the Zarqawi network that blew up all these mosques and hospitals and all the atrocities that we kind of have put in our rearview mirror, Al-Qaeda in Iraq was supported by Iran as well. This is what we don't understand. We say, oh, they're a radical Sunni organization. They would never do business with Iran. The reality is very different. The whole notion that Iran was fighting ISIS, we had a common foe. Iran is the instrument by which ISIS got its weapons, got its training, and got money. And for that reason, that regime can never be, in its current form, cannot be negotiated with. It can't be mollified or pacified. It is dedicated to killing Americans.
So I don't understand, why hasn't this been brought out when negotiating with Iran, that they have so much American blood dripping from their hands? This is not part of the discussion. I think it should be a part of the public discourse when we engage in Iran right now, which is the administration is that also to look at the total picture, including their slaughter of American citizens.
It is, and ironically, in 2019, President Trump designated the IRGC as a terrorist organization and listed amongst the factors for it the confirmed involvement in the death of hundreds of American service members in Iraq. And in fact, one of our clients in our cases was invited by the president to the State of the Union in 2020 to highlight why the administration ultimately decided to target Qasem Soleimani, the head of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps' Quds Force, and the orchestrator of much of the violence in the Middle East. It was because they were targeting American soldiers. Now, we're obviously 5 years later, and we all have short memories these days, but my clients certainly don't have a short memory about this.
Thank you for keeping up their fight. And I know Israel's been fighting with generals and fighting the war in Gaza and against Hamas, against Hezbollah. You should be a general because you're fighting the fight to make sure that their money is cut off as much as possible. So I'm going to call you General Gary M. Osen, managing partner, Osen LLC. As you heard, he's suing right now with Bashar Masri, a American-Palestinian billionaire who supported terrorism, involved many other high-profile cases. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to
Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast, the pulse beat of the Jewish community.
For continuous Jewish programs, TalklineNetwork.com, or our 24-hour-a-day listen line at 641-741-0389. For past shows, you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, Instagram, and all major podcast platforms, or jewishpodcast.org. Thanks for listening to the TalklineNetwork.com.
Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.